The rain fell in sheets across Route 66, turning the asphalt into a dark mirror that reflected the headlights of passing trucks. Marcus Cole pulled his Harley Davidson to the shoulder, his leather jacket already soaked through, and that's when he saw her. 15 years had passed since he last watched her ride away, and now here she was, kneeling in the mud beside a pickup truck with a flat tire, her silver hair plastered to her face, struggling with a lug wrench that wouldn't budge. He didn't recognize her at first. The woman he remembered had jet black hair and rode a custom chopper with flames painted on the tank. She had been fearless, wild, and completely his, until she wasn't anymore. Until the night everything fell apart, and they both made choices that sent them spinning in opposite directions, like two planets knocked out of orbit. Marcus sat frozen on his bike, rain streaming down his face, watching her struggle. His hands gripped the handlebars so tight his knuckles went white beneath his riding gloves. Every instinct told him to ride away, to disappear into the storm and pretend he never saw her. But something else stirred in his chest. Something older than the pain and the anger and the years of silence. Something that remembered who they used to be before everything broke. The wind howled through the canyon walls that lined this stretch of highway, carrying with it the smell of wet sage and desert rain. Lightning flickered on the horizon, briefly illuminating the mountains in the distance. In that flash of light, Marcus saw her face clearly for the first time. Older now, lined with the evidence of years he knew nothing about, but still carrying that same stubborn set to her jaw that used to drive him crazy. She hadn't seen him yet. She was too focused on the tire, her hand slipping on the wet wrench, her shoulders shaking from either cold or exhaustion or both. A tractor trailer roared past, spraying water across her back, and she didn't even flinch. That was so like her, he thought. Too proud to call for help, too stubborn to quit, too determined to admit when she needed someone. 53 years old now, Marcus had spent the better part of 3 decades riding with the Iron Thunder Motorcycle Club out of Flagstaff, Arizona. He had crossed this country more times than he could count, seen sunrises over the Atlantic and sunsets over the Pacific, ridden through blizzards and dust storms and everything in between. He had buried friends, raised up younger riders, and built a reputation as a man who could be counted on when things got hard. But none of that had prepared him for this moment, standing in the rain, watching the woman who had once been his whole world struggle alone in the dark. Her name was Elena Reyes. And 20 years ago, she had been the vice president of their chapter, the first woman to ever hold that position in their club's history. She rode harder than most men, fought fiercer than anyone Marcus had ever known, and loved with an intensity that still left scars on his heart. They had been together for 7 years before it all fell apart. 7 years of riding side by side, building something they thought would last forever. They had talked about leaving the club someday, buying a piece of land up in Montana, running a small shop where they could work on bikes and watch the seasons change. It was supposed to be their future, their promise. But promises break, people break. And sometimes the things you love most become the things that hurt you deepest. Marcus killed the engine on his Harley and swung his leg over the seat. The rain immediately soaked through his jeans, cold against his skin. He stood there for a moment, just watching her, trying to find the words that had escaped him for 15 years. What do you say to someone who used to be your everything? What do you say when the last words between you were spoken in anger and pain and neither of you ever found a way to take them back? He started walking toward her. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the years themselves were weighing him down. The gravel crunched beneath his boots, barely audible over the rain, but she heard it anyway. She always did have ears like a hawk. Elena looked up, and for a moment, time stopped. Her eyes went wide, her mouth opened slightly, and Marcus watched 15 years of emotion flash across her face in the span of a heartbeat. Surprise. Disbelief. Something that might have been hope. And then, finally, a guardedness that settled over her features like armor being raised. She stood slowly, the wrench still clutched in her hand, rain streaming down her face. Neither of them spoke. The storm raged around them, wind whipping Elena's jacket, thunder rumbling in the distance like the growl of some ancient beast. But in that moment, there was only the two of them, standing on the side of a road they had traveled together so many times before, separated by 3 feet of wet asphalt and 15 years of silence. Marcus took off his gloves. His hands were calloused and rough, scarred from decades of working on engines and fighting battles he'd rather forget. He tucked the gloves into his jacket pocket and held out his hand. She looked at it like it was something dangerous. Maybe it was. The storm intensified around them, rain now falling so hard it was difficult to see more than a few feet in any direction. A bolt of lightning struck somewhere close enough that Marcus felt the hair on his arms stand up. The thunder that followed was deafening, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Elena lowered the wrench. Her eyes never left his, and then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were cold and wet, but her grip was still strong. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, some knot that had been tied tight for so long he'd forgotten it was there. This wasn't forgiveness. They were far from that. This was just two people standing in a storm, reaching out because the alternative was drowning alone. The words that came out of his mouth weren't the ones he'd planned. They weren't eloquent or meaningful or any of the things he'd imagined saying if he ever got another chance. They were simple, direct, and completely practical. "I've got a better wrench on my bike." Elena stared at him for a long moment. And then, despite everything, despite the years and the pain and the words they could never take back, she laughed. It was a small sound, almost lost in the rain, but Marcus heard it clearly. It was the first time he'd heard her laugh in 15 years. They walked back to his Harley together, shoulders almost touching, moving through the storm like they'd done 1,000 times before. Marcus dug through his saddlebag and found the heavy-duty wrench he always carried for emergencies. When he handed it to her, their fingers brushed and neither of them pulled away quickly. "Let me help," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena looked at him, rain dripping from her chin, her eyes searching his face for something he wasn't sure he could give her. But after a moment, she nodded. They walked back to her truck and got to work. Marcus knelt in the mud beside her, holding the flashlight from his bike while she positioned the wrench. The lug nuts were rusted, probably hadn't been changed in years, but together they managed to break them loose one by one. They worked in silence, moving around each other with the ease of people who had done this 100 times before. Some things the body remembers even when the mind tries to forget. The rain began to let up as they lifted the spare tire into place. The storm was moving east, chasing the lightning toward New Mexico, leaving behind the clean smell of wet desert and the drip of water from every surface. Stars began to appear between the breaking clouds, first one, then a handful, then a whole scattered army of light emerging from the darkness. Marcus tightened the last lug nut and stood, his knees protesting after so long in the mud. Elena stood beside him, looking at the tire like she couldn't quite believe it was done. Her jacket was covered in mud, her jeans were soaked through, and she was shivering slightly in the cooling night air. But she was beautiful. She had always been beautiful to him, even when he was too angry to admit it. They stood there in the aftermath of the storm, neither quite ready to break the silence that had settled between them. The highway was empty now, the trucks and cars having passed while they worked, leaving them alone in a pocket of quiet that felt almost sacred. "Thank you." Elena's voice was rougher than he remembered, worn by years of living he knew nothing about. She didn't look at him when she said it. Marcus nodded. He wanted to say more, wanted to ask where she'd been, what she'd done, if she'd ever thought about him during all those silent years. But the words stuck in his throat, tangled up with pride and fear and 1,000 other things he'd never learned how to express. Elena walked around to the driver's side of her truck and opened the door. The interior light came on, revealing a small cab cluttered with road maps and coffee cups and a worn photograph stuck to the dashboard. Marcus couldn't see what the photo was from where he stood, but he wondered. She paused with one foot in the truck, turning back to look at him. The light from the cab caught her face, and Marcus saw something there that surprised him. Not anger, not resentment, Something softer. Something almost like sorrow. "There's a diner about 5 miles up the road," she said. "Mabel's place. You remember it." He did remember it. They used to stop there on every ride through this stretch of highway, back when they were young and in love and thought they had all the time in the world. Mabel made the best peach pie in 3 states, and Elena used to steal bites off his plate, even though she always ordered her own slice. "I remember," he said. Elena held his gaze for a long moment. Something unspoken passed between them, some understanding that words would only complicate. Then she climbed into her truck, started the engine, and pulled back onto the highway. Her taillights disappeared around the bend, swallowed by the darkness and the lingering mist from the storm. Marcus stood there for a long time watching the empty road. The stars continued to emerge overhead, thousands of them now, painting the sky with light that had traveled millions of years just to reach this particular spot on this particular night. He thought about fate and coincidence and all the roads that had led him to this moment. He thought about Elena, driving toward Mabel's diner, wondering if she was hoping he would follow, or praying that he wouldn't. He walked back to his Harley and straddled the seat. The engine turned over on the first try, its familiar rumble vibrating through his bones. He sat there for another moment, hands on the handlebars, facing the direction Elena had gone. 5 miles. That's all that separated them now. 5 miles and 15 years and all the things they'd never said. Marcus Cole had faced down threats that would make most men run. He had ridden through storms that seemed determined to kill him, crossed deserts that stretched on forever, and survived losses that had nearly broken him. But sitting there on his Harley, staring at that dark stretch of highway, he felt more afraid than he had in years. Because following her meant facing everything they'd buried. It meant opening wounds that had never fully healed. It meant admitting that despite everything, despite the anger and the pain and the years of pretending he was over her, some part of him had never stopped loving Elena Reyes. He took a deep breath. The air was clean now, washed fresh by the storm, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. In the distance, a coyote howled, its voice rising and falling like a question sent into the night. Marcus twisted the throttle and pointed his bike toward Mabel's diner. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one prove that sometimes the roads we run from are the same roads that lead us home. Subscribe now, because you never know when a story might change the way you see the world. Mabel's diner sat at the intersection of Route 66 and a nameless county road that wound up into the mountains, toward the old mining towns that had been abandoned decades ago. The building itself was a relic from the 50s, chrome siding, neon signs, and a parking lot that had seen more motorcycles than most dealerships. Mabel herself had passed away 7 years back, but her granddaughter Sophie had kept the place running, maintaining the same recipes and the same spirit that had made it a legend among riders for over 60 years. Marcus pulled into the lot and killed his engine. Elena's truck was parked near the entrance, still dripping from the storm, mud caked on the fenders and running boards. Through the diner's windows, he could see her sitting at a booth near the back, the same booth they always used to choose. Some things really don't change. He sat on his bike for a moment, gathering himself. The fear was still there, coiled tight in his stomach, but something else was emerging alongside it. Curiosity, maybe, or hope. He wasn't sure which was more dangerous. The bell above the door chimed when he walked in. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. Just a trucker nursing coffee at the counter and an old couple sharing a plate of fries in the corner. Sophie looked up from behind the register, her face breaking into a wide smile when she recognized him. "Marcus Cole," she said. "Haven't seen you in months." "The usual." He nodded, not trusting his voice. Sophie had inherited her grandmother's gift for reading people, and he didn't want to explain why he was here or who he was meeting. Some things were better left private. Elena didn't look up when he approached her booth. She was staring out the window at the mountains, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had probably gone cold by now. Marcus slid into the seat across from her, the vinyl squeaking beneath his weight, and waited. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Marcus studied her face in the diner's warm light, noting the changes that 15 years had made. The lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before, the silver in her hair that she wore proudly instead of hiding, the way she held herself, still strong, still fierce, but with something underneath that looked almost like weariness. She finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were the same deep brown he remembered, but there was a distance in them now, a wall that hadn't been there when they were young. "I thought about not stopping," she said. "When I saw your bike, I thought about just driving past and pretending I didn't see you. Why didn't you?" "I don't know." Elena shook her head slightly, a strand of silver hair falling across her face. "Maybe I'm tired of running." Sophie appeared with Marcus's coffee and a slice of peach pie he hadn't ordered. "On the house," she said with a knowing look that suggested she understood more than she was letting on. She disappeared back behind the counter, leaving them alone with their history and their silence. Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm mug. The coffee was strong and bitter, exactly the way Mabel used to make it. He took a sip, letting the heat spread through his chest, buying time while he searched for words. "You look good," he finally said. It felt inadequate, but it was true. Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I look old. We're both old." She met his eyes then, really met them, and for a moment the wall came down. "I never thought I'd see you again," she said. "After everything that happened, I figured you'd crossed me off your list and moved on." Marcus set down his coffee. The truth sat heavy on his tongue, demanding to be spoken. He had spent 15 years running from this moment, 15 years pretending he was fine, that she hadn't left a hole in his life that nothing else could fill. But sitting here now, looking at her across this table they had shared so many times before, the lies felt too heavy to carry anymore. "I never moved on," he said. His voice was rough, barely above a whisper. "I just learned how to live around the empty space you left." Elena's eyes glistened. She blinked rapidly, looking away, her jaw tight with the effort of holding something back. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, filling the silence with their steady buzz. Outside, the last remnants of the storm drifted past, clouds breaking apart to reveal patches of star-filled sky. "I left because I had to," she finally said. "You know that. I know what you told me. It was the truth." "Was it?" Marcus leaned forward, his voice hardening slightly. "Because from where I was standing, it looked like you just walked away. From the club. From everything we built. From me." Elena's hands tightened around her coffee cup. Her knuckles went white, and for a moment Marcus thought she might throw the whole thing in his face. Part of him almost wished she would. Anger was easier to deal with than this awful, aching sorrow that hung between them like smoke. "You don't know what it cost me to leave," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what I gave up, then tell me." The challenge hung in the air. Elena stared at him, something working behind her eyes, some internal battle that Marcus couldn't see but could feel. The trucker at the counter paid his bill and left, the bell above the door chiming his departure. The old couple in the corner had gone quiet, lost in their own world. It was just the two of them now, suspended in this moment that had been 15 years in the making. Elena took a deep breath. She released her grip on the coffee cup and laid her hands flat on the table, palms down, like she was bracing herself against what was coming. "There was a threat," she said. "Someone who wanted to hurt the club. Hurt you, specifically. I made a deal." "What kind of deal?" "The kind that meant I had to disappear." She looked at him then, and the wall was completely down, her eyes filled with a pain that matched his own. "I couldn't tell you because if you knew, you'd have tried to stop it. And then they would have followed through on everything they promised to do." Marcus felt the world tilt slightly beneath him. He gripped the edge of the table, anchoring himself, trying to process what she was telling him. For 15 years, he had believed she left because she stopped loving him, because she got tired of the life they'd built, because he wasn't enough to make her stay. "Who?" he demanded. "Who made you leave?" Elena shook her head. "It doesn't matter anymore. They're gone." Have been for years. I only found out recently when I finally worked up the courage to check. It matters to me. Why? She leaned forward, her voice rising slightly. What are you going to do, Marcus? Ride off into the sunset and get revenge on ghosts. That's not going to change anything. That's not going to give us back the years we lost. She was right, and he hated her for it. Hated himself for the rage that surged through him, impotent and directionless. All this time. All these wasted years, built on a lie that someone else had constructed to tear them apart. And the worst part was that Elena had carried this alone, had sacrificed everything to protect him from a threat he never even knew existed. You should have told me, he said. His voice cracked on the last word. I know. Elena's eyes were wet now, tears she refused to let fall. I know I should have, but I was scared. And by the time I realized I'd made a mistake, it had been too long. I didn't know how to find my way back. The pie sat untouched between them, the peaches glistening under the fluorescent lights. Marcus stared at it, remembering all the times they'd shared a slice just like this one, laughing about nothing, planning a future that had been stolen from them by someone whose name he didn't even know. He reached across the table and took her hand. Her skin was warm now, dried from the rain, but still rough from years of hard living. She looked at their joined hands, then up at him, and something in her expression shifted. Hope, maybe, or fear. With Elena, they had always been hard to tell apart. We can't get those years back, Marcus said. But we're here now, both of us, still breathing, still standing. And what does that mean? I don't know. He squeezed her hand gently. But I know I'm tired of being angry, tired of carrying this weight. If there's any chance of putting it down, I want to take it. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a car pulled into the lot, its headlights sweeping across the window. The engine cut off, and then there was only the silence and the steady hum of the diner and the sound of their own breathing. I'm staying at the Desert Rose Motel, she finally said, about 20 miles south of here. I was heading back to California when the tire blew. California. I have a shop there, motorcycle repair. Small, but it keeps me busy. Marcus nodded. He tried to picture her in California, surrounded by bikes and tools and customers who didn't know anything about the woman she used to be. It was strange, imagining her life continuing without him, just as his had continued without her. Two parallel lines that had finally intersected again after all this time. What were you doing out here? She asked. Heading to a rally in Albuquerque. Club business. You're still with the Iron Thunder. President now. Elena's eyebrows rose. Something like pride flickered across her face, quickly suppressed. President. Look at you. It's not as glamorous as it sounds. Nothing ever is. They sat there as Sophie refilled their coffees, neither wanting to break the fragile peace that had settled between them. The old couple left, waving to Sophie on their way out. The diner was truly empty now, just the two of them and Sophie pretending to busy herself behind the counter. Marcus thought about the rally in Albuquerque, about the club and the responsibilities waiting for him there, about the brothers who would be wondering where he was if he didn't show up on time. And then he thought about Elena, about the years they'd lost and the explanation that had finally been given, about the chance that fate or coincidence or something else entirely had placed in front of him. The rally can wait, he said. Elena looked at him sharply. You don't have to do that. I know. I want to. Marcus. There was so much weight in the way she said his name, so much history, so much pain, so much of everything they'd never been able to say to each other. He met her eyes and held them, letting her see that he meant what he said. 15 years, he told her. I spent 15 years thinking you chose to leave. Now I find out you didn't. That changes things, Elena. It changes everything. It doesn't fix anything. No, but it gives us a place to start. The night deepened around the diner, the stars growing brighter as the last clouds drifted away. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle sounded, long and mournful, echoing off the canyon walls. Sophie started closing up, turning off the signs in the window and wiping down the counter. But she didn't ask them to leave. She seemed to understand that some conversations needed time to unfold. Elena pulled out her wallet and dropped enough bills on the table to cover both their meals twice over. She stood, reaching for her jacket, then paused. The hesitation was visible on her face, the uncertainty of what came next. "Follow me to the motel," she said. "We can talk more there. Figure out what this is." It wasn't a promise. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just an invitation, fragile and tentative, offered across the wreckage of everything they'd been to each other. Marcus took it for what it was, a beginning, or maybe an ending. He wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. They walked out into the night together, their boots crunching on the gravel. The air was cold now, crisp and clean after the storm, carrying the smell of wet sage and distant mountains. Elena climbed into her truck while Marcus straddled his Harley. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the parking lot. Two people who had once been everything to each other, trying to figure out what they were now. Elena started her truck and pulled out onto the highway. Marcus followed, his headlight cutting through the darkness, watching her taillights lead the way south. 20 miles. That was all the distance they had left to cover. 20 miles to figure out what 15 years had made of them. 20 miles to decide if they were strong enough to try again. The desert stretched out around them, vast and ancient, and utterly indifferent to the small human dramas playing out beneath its stars. But to Marcus, following Elena's taillights through the night, it had never felt more alive. The Desert Rose Motel was the kind of place that time had forgotten. A single strip of rooms with faded pink doors and a neon sign that flickered erratically in the darkness. The parking lot was cracked and weedy, but the view of the mountains was spectacular, their dark shapes silhouetted against a sky ablaze with stars. Elena pulled into a space in front of room 7. Marcus parked his Harley beside her truck and killed the engine. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the distant howl of a coyote and the tick of cooling engines. She led him inside without a word. The room was small but clean, with a bed that had seen better days and a television that probably hadn't worked since the 90s. But there was a small table by the window, and Elena pulled out the 2 chairs that flanked it, gesturing for Marcus to sit. He did, watching as she moved around the room. She pulled a bottle of whiskey from her bag and 2 glasses that she'd clearly brought from somewhere else. She poured them each a measure and set one in front of him before taking the other chair. The whiskey was good, smooth, with a hint of smoke. Marcus let it warm his throat while he studied Elena's face in the dim light from the bedside lamp. She looked tired, he realized. Bone deep, tired. The kind that sleep doesn't fix. He wondered how long she'd been carrying this secret, this weight that she'd never been able to set down. "Tell me about California," he said. Elena swirled her whiskey, watching the amber liquid catch the light. "It's quiet. Near the coast, north of San Francisco. I have a little place with a garage out back. Mostly I work on vintage bikes for collectors. Pays the bills. You always had good hands." She smiled slightly at that, the first real smile he'd seen from her all night. "I remember you used to say that. I meant it." The silence stretched between them again, but it felt different now. Less loaded. More like the comfortable quiet of 2 people who had once known each other well, finding their way back to familiar ground. "What happened to the club?" Elena asked. "After I left." Marcus took a long breath. The question opened doors he usually kept firmly shut. But if they were going to do this, whatever this was, he owed her honesty. "It was hard," he said. "You leaving the way you did? Some of the guys thought you'd betrayed us. Others just thought you'd gotten soft. I didn't know what to think. And now I know the truth." He met her eyes. "Now I have to figure out how to tell them." Elena shook her head. "Don't. What good would it do? The people who made me leave are gone. Bringing it up now would just open old wounds. Those wounds never closed. That's not true. You moved on. You became president. You built something. I built it on a lie. Marcus set down his glass harder than he intended. Every decision I made for the last 15 years was based on thinking you'd abandoned us. That changes things. It doesn't have to. How can you say that? Elena leaned forward, her eyes intense. Because I've spent 15 years living with what I did. I made peace with it. I had to, or it would have destroyed me. Now you're asking me to dig it all up again, to relive it, to let it define me all over again. And I don't know if I can do that. Marcus opened his mouth to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. He saw the truth of what she was saying, the cost written in every line of her face. She hadn't just left him 15 years ago. She had sacrificed herself, her identity, her home, her love, to protect something she believed in. And now she was asking him to let her keep whatever peace she'd managed to find. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever asked of him. But looking at her across that table, seeing the woman she'd become, he understood that love sometimes meant letting go of the need for justice. Sometimes it meant accepting that the past couldn't be fixed, only lived with. Okay, he said finally. I won't tell them. Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly. Thank you. But I need to know something. What? Why did you agree to let me follow you here tonight? Why not just drive away and leave all this behind again? Elena was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the window at the desert, at the mountains rising black against the star-filled sky. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost fragile. Because I'm tired of being alone. She turned back to him. And because when I saw you standing in that rain, something in me remembered what it felt like to have someone I could count on. I've missed that. I've missed you. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for so long he'd forgotten it was there. He reached across the table and took her hand, just as he had in the diner. But this time, neither of them pulled away. I've missed you too, he said. Every single day. The hours passed slowly after that, measured not in minutes but in words finally spoken, stories finally shared, silences finally understood. Elena told him about California, about the shop she'd built and the life she'd made from the wreckage of the one she'd left behind. Marcus told her about the club, about the men he'd led and the battles they'd fought, and the way he'd never stopped looking for her in every crowd he passed. And somewhere in the telling, something shifted between them. The walls came down, brick by brick, until they were just two people sitting in a motel room, trying to find their way back to each other. If you are watching this and feeling something stir in your heart, I want you to pause and leave a comment right now. Write these words for me. True love never dies. It just waits for the right moment to return. Say it out loud, write it down, and let the world know that you believe in second chances. Dawn came slowly to the desert, the sky shifting from black to deep blue to the first pale hints of gold. Marcus stood at the window of Elena's motel room, watching the sun rise over the mountains. He hadn't slept all night, but he didn't feel tired. He felt something else entirely, alive in a way he hadn't felt in years. Elena stirred behind him. She had finally dozed off a few hours ago, curled up on the bed with her jacket pulled over her like a blanket. He had watched her sleep for a while, marveling at the strange turns of fate that had brought them back together after so many years. Now she was awake, sitting up slowly, pushing her silver hair back from her face. She looked at him standing by the window, and something passed across her expression. Surprise, maybe, that he was still there. I made coffee, he said, nodding toward the small pot on the dresser. It's probably terrible. Motel coffee always is. She poured herself a cup anyway, adding the small packets of sugar and creamer that had been left next to the pot. Marcus watched her move around the room, noting the ease that had crept into her posture overnight. She looked less guarded now, less like she was waiting for the other shoe to drop. What happens now? She asked, sitting on the edge of the bed with her coffee. Marcus turned from the window. The rally in Albuquerque. I should probably make some calls. Let the guys know I'm delayed. How long are you planning to be delayed? He crossed the room and sat down beside her. The bed creaked under his weight, the springs protesting their age. Elena didn't move away. If anything, she leaned slightly toward him, closing the small distance that remained between them. As long as it takes, he said. That's not really an answer. No, it's not. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek. I don't have answers right now, Elena. All I know is that I'm not ready to walk away from this. From you. She set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. Her eyes searched his face, looking for something. Truth, maybe, or certainty. He didn't know if she found it. I have a life in California, she said. A business. Responsibilities. I know. And you have a club. Brothers who depend on you. I know that too. So, what are we supposed to do? Pretend the last 15 years didn't happen. Go back to being who we were before. Marcus shook his head. We can't go back. We're different people now. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we needed to become who we are now before we could find our way back to each other. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the sun continued to rise, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold. A bird called somewhere in the distance, its song bright and clear in the morning air. I don't know how to do this, she finally said. I don't know how to let someone in again. Neither do I. But I'd like to try. If you're willing. The words hung between them, fragile as spun glass. Marcus waited, barely breathing, watching the war play out on Elena's face. He knew this was asking a lot, of both of them. The risk of opening themselves up again, of trusting each other after everything they'd been through. It would have been easier to walk away, to retreat back into their separate lives, and let the past stay buried. But easier wasn't the same as better, and Marcus was tired of easy. Elena reached out and took his hand. Her grip was firm, decisive, like she'd made up her mind about something important. Okay, she said. Let's try. The next few days passed in a kind of suspended reality, separate from the rest of the world. Marcus called the club and told them he'd been delayed by personal business. They didn't ask questions. They knew him well enough to trust that if he said something was important, it was. The rally would go on without him, and he would catch up when he could. Instead of riding to Albuquerque, he stayed with Elena at the Desert Rose Motel. They talked more in those days than they had in the 7 years they'd been together before. About everything. About nothing. About the small details of their lives that had accumulated over the years like layers of dust. Elena told him about the first year after she left, the hardest year of her life. About living in cheap motels, moving every few weeks, never staying long enough to let anyone get close. About the constant fear that she'd be found, that the people who had made her leave would discover she hadn't gone far enough. She told him about finally settling in California, about the relief of building something that was hers alone, about the loneliness that crept in around the edges, the ache of missing him that never fully went away no matter how busy she kept herself. And Marcus told her about his own years. About the anger that had consumed him after she left, the way he'd thrown himself into the club as a way of running from the pain. About the women he'd tried and failed to connect with, the ones who couldn't understand why he always seemed to be looking over their shoulder for someone who wasn't there. He told her about becoming president, about the weight of that responsibility, and the way it had both grounded him and isolated him. About the nights he'd spent staring at old photographs, wondering where she was, whether she was happy, whether she ever thought about him at all. Each story, each confession, brought them closer. Not to the people they used to be, but to the people they were becoming, together, against all odds, on the far side of loss. On the 4th day, Elena suggested they go for a ride. She hadn't been on a motorcycle in years, she admitted. Her truck was practical, reliable, necessary for the work she did, but it wasn't the same. It could never be the same. Marcus helped her onto the back of his Harley, steadying the bike as she swung her leg over and settled into place behind him. Her arms came around his waist, her body pressing against his back, and suddenly they were young again. Or not young exactly, but alive, present, together in a way they hadn't been in far too long. He started the engine and pulled out onto the highway. The desert opened up around them, vast and golden in the morning light. The road stretched ahead, empty and endless, winding through canyons and over mesas, past ancient rock formations and stands of wind-bent juniper. Elena tightened her arms around him and rested her head against his shoulder. Marcus felt her warmth through his jacket, felt the steady rhythm of her breathing. And for the first time in 15 years, something inside him finally settled. They rode for hours, stopping occasionally to stretch their legs or take in a particularly stunning view. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. The road said everything that needed to be said, each mile a statement of intent, each turn a renewed commitment to wherever this was taking them. When they finally stopped for lunch at a small roadside diner, Elena was glowing. Her cheeks were flushed from the wind, her eyes bright, her smile wider than Marcus had seen it since they were reunited. She looked younger somehow, like riding had stripped away some of the years and the pain and left only the woman he remembered. "I forgot how much I missed this," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "The freedom, the open road, it missed you too." She laughed at that, a real laugh, full and warm. He wanted to bottle it, keep it somewhere safe where he could take it out whenever the world got too dark. They ordered burgers and milkshakes, the same thing they used to order at places just like this one decades ago. The food was greasy and delicious, and Elena stole fries off his plate just like she always used to. When he caught her hand and held it, she didn't pull away. "Come to California with me," she said suddenly. Marcus blinked. "What?" "Come to California." She squeezed his hand. "I know it's crazy. I know you have the club, responsibilities. But I just spent 15 years without you, and I don't want to spend another 15. Life's too short. We've already proven that." He stared at her across the table, his heart pounding. It was crazy. It was completely, utterly insane. He was the president of a motorcycle club, with brothers who depended on him, a life he'd built from the ground up. He couldn't just walk away from all of that. Could he? "The club will survive without you," Elena said, reading his thoughts. "You've trained good people. They'll carry on what you started. And maybe it's time for you to start something new." Marcus thought about the rallies and the rides and the brotherhood, about the freedom he'd found on the road and the home he'd made with the Iron Thunder. It had been everything to him for so long, the only thing keeping him moving forward after Elena left. But looking at her now, seeing the hope in her eyes, he realized something. The club had never been the destination. It had been the journey. And every journey eventually comes to an end. "Let me think about it," he said. Elena nodded, accepting that. She didn't push, didn't press. She just held his hand across the table and let him work through it in his own time. They rode back to the motel as the sun began to set, the sky turning to fire above the mountains. Marcus parked the Harley and helped Elena off, steadying her as her legs protested after so many hours in the saddle. She winced but laughed, shaking out her muscles. "I'm going to feel that tomorrow." Worth it. Definitely worth it. They went inside, and Elena took a shower while Marcus sat by the window, watching the stars emerge one by one. He thought about her offer, about California and the life she'd built there, about leaving everything he knew and starting over in a place where no one knew his name or his history. It was terrifying, and exhilarating, and absolutely the most alive he'd felt in years. When Elena emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel with her silver hair wet against her shoulders, she found him still sitting by the window. She came to stand beside him, looking out at the same stars. "You don't have to decide tonight," she said. "I know." He turned to look at her. "But I already have." The call to the club was harder than Marcus expected. He sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, while Elena gave him space, stepping outside to watch the sunset. The number connected after 3 rings, and then Diesel's gruff voice filled his ear. Diesel was his vice president, his right hand for the past 10 years. A man he trusted with his life. A man who was about to hear that everything was changing. Marcus laid it out simply, the way he always handled club business. He explained that he'd found Elena, that circumstances had changed, that he needed to step back. He didn't go into the details of why she'd left. That secret would stay between them. But he made it clear that this wasn't a request. It was a decision. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for a long moment. "You're serious about this," Diesel finally said. "Dead serious. For a woman. For my life." Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, Diesel laughed. "Always figured something like this would happen eventually. You've been half a ghost for as long as I've known you. Someone was bound to bring you back to the living. You're not angry. I'm surprised. But if you found something worth leaving for, who am I to argue? We'll figure out the transition. Take the time you need." Marcus felt something ease in his chest. He'd expected resistance, arguments, maybe even accusations of betrayal. Instead, he got understanding. It reminded him why he'd chosen Diesel as his second in the first place. "Keep the brothers safe," Marcus said. "Always do. And Marcus. Yeah. Bring her by someday. Anyone who can pull you off this road deserves to be family." The call ended, and Marcus sat there for a moment, absorbing the enormity of what he'd just done. 20 years of his life, handed over in a single phone conversation. It should have felt like loss. Instead, it felt like freedom. Elena came back inside as the last light faded from the sky. She looked at his face and seemed to understand without him saying a word. "It's done. It's done." She sat down beside him and took his hand. "How do you feel?" "Terrified." He turned to look at her. "And ready." The next morning, they packed up Elena's motel room and loaded her truck. Marcus strapped his saddlebags to his Harley and did a final check of the bike, making sure everything was road ready for the long ride to California. It would take them 3 days if they pushed it, longer if they took their time. They agreed to take their time. They had 15 years to make up for, after all. They set out at dawn, Elena leading in her truck while Marcus followed on his Harley. The desert unfurled before them, golden and vast, the mountains receding in the rearview mirror as they headed west. The road was empty and quiet, belonging only to them. They stopped for breakfast at a truck stop in Arizona, sharing a booth and stealing bites off each other's plates. They stopped for lunch at a roadside stand in California, eating tacos in the shade of a twisted oak tree while hawks circled overhead. They stopped for the night at a small motel near the coast, falling into bed exhausted and content, wrapped around each other like they had all the time in the world. Because they did. Finally, they did. On the third day, they reached Elena's place. It was everything she'd described, a small house perched on a cliff above the Pacific, with a garage out back that served as her workshop. The ocean stretched to the horizon, endless and blue, waves crashing against the rocks below. Marcus stood in the driveway breathing in the salt air, feeling something settle in his chest. Home. It felt like home. Not because of the place itself, but because of who was standing beside him. "What do you think?" Elena asked. "I think I could get used to this." She smiled and took his hand, leading him inside. The house was small but comfortable, filled with the evidence of her life here. Motorcycle parts on the counter, photographs on the walls, a worn leather couch facing a window with a view of the sea. It was lived in and imperfect, and completely her. Marcus walked through the room slowly, taking it all in. He stopped at a photograph on the mantel, one he hadn't expected to see. It was the two of them, decades ago, standing in front of their bikes with their arms around each other, young and wild and ridiculously in love. "You kept this," he said. Elena came to stand beside him. "I kept everything. Every photograph, every letter, every memory. I couldn't let go. Not really." He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. She smelled like the road and the sea and something uniquely her. She smelled like the past and the future, all wrapped up together. "I love you," he said. "I should have said it sooner. I should have said it 15 years ago, every day until you believed it enough to stay. I love you too." She pulled back to look at him, her eyes wet but her smile steady. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." The days that followed were a kind of rebuilding. Marcus learned the rhythms of Elena's life, the early mornings in the garage, the late afternoons walking the cliffs, the quiet evenings watching the sun sink into the Pacific. He started helping out in the workshop, his hands remembering the tools even after years away. They worked side by side, not talking much, but not needing to. The silence between them had become comfortable, natural, filled with all the words they'd already said, and all the ones they didn't need to speak. Word spread through the biking community that Elena had a partner now, a former club president who knew his way around an engine. Business picked up. Customers who'd been on the fence about bringing their vintage bikes suddenly found reasons to stop by. Marcus discovered he liked the work, the puzzle of diagnosis, the satisfaction of repair, the moment when a machine that had been broken roared back to life. It was different from leading the club, quieter, smaller, but it was enough. 3 months into his new life, Marcus got a visit he wasn't expecting. He was in the garage, elbow deep in the engine of a 1970s Triumph, when the sound of motorcycles rumbled up the driveway. He straightened, wiping his hands on a rag, and stepped outside. There were 6 of them, wearing the colors of the Iron Thunder MC. Diesel was in front, his silver beard catching the sunlight, his eyes crinkling with a smile Marcus knew well. "Heard you were setting up shop," Diesel said, killing his engine. "Thought we'd come see what all the fuss was about." Marcus looked at the men assembled before him. Brothers he'd ridden with, fought with, bled with. They shouldn't have been here. Club business was club business, and he'd walked away from it. But they weren't here for club business. He could see that in their faces. They were here because they were family, and family didn't end just because someone changed their address. Elena appeared from inside the house, drying her hands on a dish towel. Her eyes went wide when she saw the bikes, the colors, the men. "You must be the famous Elena," Diesel said, swinging off his bike and removing his helmet. "Marcus never would shut up about you. It's good to finally meet the woman who stole our president." "Former president," Marcus corrected. Diesel waved a hand. Details. They stayed for 3 days. The garage became a gathering place, filled with the sound of engines and laughter and stories that spanned decades. Elena cooked enormous meals that disappeared in minutes. The brothers slept in tents in the yard, unwilling to leave before they absolutely had to. And Marcus realized something he hadn't expected. He didn't have to choose between his old life and his new one. He could have both. The club would always be his family, even from a distance. And Elena would always be his home, no matter where they went. On the last night, Diesel pulled Marcus aside. They stood on the cliff overlooking the ocean, watching the waves turn silver in the moonlight. "You found it?" Diesel said. "Found what?" "Peace." Diesel clapped him on the shoulder. "You look different, brother. Lighter. Like someone finally took the weight off your shoulders." Marcus looked back at the house, where Elena was laughing with the other riders, her face glowing in the porch light. She caught his eye and smiled, a smile that reached all the way across the yard and wrapped around his heart. "I did," Marcus said. "I finally did." 1 year later, Marcus stood in front of the small crowd gathered in Elena's garage, his heart pounding harder than it had during any confrontation in his years with the club. The space had been transformed. Fairy lights strung from the rafters, flowers arranged on every flat surface, chairs set up in neat rows facing a simple wooden arch. It had been Elena's idea to have the ceremony here, in the place where they'd rebuilt their lives together, where they'd learned to trust again, to love again, to believe in second chances. The guests were an eclectic mix. Members of the Iron Thunder who had made the ride from Arizona, locals from the coastal town they now called home, customers who had become friends over months of shared coffee and engine talk. Sophie had driven all the way from Mabel's diner, claiming she wouldn't miss this for the world. The music started, a simple acoustic version of a song they both loved, and Marcus turned to watch Elena walk down the aisle. She was wearing white, but not a traditional dress. Leather pants, riding boots, and a white jacket with silver embroidery that caught the light. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, silver and beautiful. She was grinning, that fierce, wild grin that had captured his heart decades ago. She reached his side and took his hands. Her fingers were warm and steady, her grip sure. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment, about the roads that bring people together and the choices that keep them there. Marcus barely heard any of it. He was too busy looking at Elena, marveling at the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. When it was time for vows, he spoke from the heart. 15 years ago, I thought I lost you forever. I spent all that time trying to fill a hole that couldn't be filled, looking for something I'd convinced myself I'd never find again. And then there you were, standing in the rain, fighting a tire that was too stubborn to give up. Just like you. He smiled, and she laughed, and the crowd laughed with them. I can't promise you perfection. I can't promise you easy. But I can promise you this. I will never stop choosing you. Every day, every mile, every moment. You're my road, Elena, and I'm done running from where I'm supposed to be. Elena's eyes were wet when she spoke her vows. I spent 15 years protecting you from a distance, loving you from a place you couldn't reach. I thought that was the sacrifice I had to make, and I made peace with it. But then you showed up in that storm, and you didn't walk away. You reached out your hand and offered to help, even after everything. She squeezed his fingers. That's who you are. You show up. You stay. You fight for the people you love. And I'm done running too. I choose you, Marcus. Today and every day after. Until the road ends and then beyond. They exchanged rings, simple bands they'd forged together in the garage because that was who they were. Two people who built things with their hands and their hearts. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marcus pulled Elena close and kissed her like he'd wanted to kiss her for 15 years. The crowd cheered. Somewhere, someone started an engine. Probably Diesel, never one to miss a dramatic moment. And the roar filled the garage like applause. The reception spilled out into the yard as the sun set over the Pacific. There was food and music and dancing, though Marcus had never been much of a dancer. He held Elena close and swayed with her anyway, not caring how he looked, caring only about the woman in his arms. Diesel gave a toast that made everyone laugh and a few people cry. Sophie presented them with a peach pie, claiming it was her grandmother's recipe for happy endings. The Iron Thunder brothers performed a synchronized ride around the property that made the ground shake. And through it all, Marcus kept coming back to the same thought. How strange and beautiful life could be. How the worst moments could lead to the best ones. How love, real love, could survive anything. Distance, time, silence, pain. As the party wound down and the stars came out, Marcus and Elena slipped away to their favorite spot on the cliff. They sat side by side, looking out at the dark ocean, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below. Happy? She asked. Terrified, he said, echoing a conversation from a year ago. She laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder. Good terrified or bad terrified? The best kind. They sat there until the party sounds faded behind them, until the moon rose high and silver over the water. Two people who had found each other, lost each other, and found each other again. Two people who had chosen to stop running and start building. Tomorrow they would open the garage and get back to work. Next week they would take a ride up the coast, following the road wherever it wanted to go. Next month, next year, next decade, they would keep choosing each other, keep showing up, keep building a life from the wreckage of the old one. That was what love was, Marcus realized. Not the absence of pain, but the choice to stay anyway. Not perfection, but presence. Not the destination, but the road you traveled together. He looked at Elena, at this woman who had changed everything, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope. Real, honest, hard-earned hope. And that, he thought, was the best kind of beginning. If you watched this far, it is because you truly connected with this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched to the end." This way, I can get to know you and see who really appreciates these stories. Your presence here matters more than you know, and while you are here, take a moment to hit that like button if this story touched your heart. Share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances today. And subscribe to this channel so you never miss another journey like this one. Because somewhere out there, on a rainy stretch of highway, two people who thought they had lost everything are about to find each other again. And maybe, just maybe, their story is only beginning.